Cheers, Rockets fans. Welcome to The Locker Line, an exclusive podcast from the home of the Rockets.
Whoa!
Sports Talk 790.
Rockets!
The Locker Line is proudly served to you by Carbox Clutch City Lager.
It is good!
Oh, yeah? Red Nation, get ready. Get ready. The Locker Line starts now.
Welcome aboard.
Welcome back to a long-awaited episode of The Lager Line, as always served to you courtesy of Clutch City Lager of Carbach Brewing. I'm your host, Ben Dubose, editor of USA Today's Rockets Wire, joined by our new co-host and producer, Paolo Alves, who you can follow on Twitter at Paolo Alves NBA. Paolo, how's it going, my friend?
It's going really well. We're coming off the Astros winning the World Series, and my guy Jeremy Pena winning basically every award. So, from a sports happiness standpoint, it's going well. From a Rocket standpoint, could be worse. So
they won a game.
Yeah, they won a game, which if you followed me, that's not the bigger deal. But
right.
They won a game, and the young guys, apart from Jabari, looked good in winning that game. So that's what matters.
For sure. And I mentioned long-awaited episode. That's because we did not record last week. We figured that during the World Series, 90% of you all listening are focused on things other than the Rockets, especially when the Rockets are in the middle of a 6-game losing streak, which they were at that time. I don't even want to guess at what the audience figures were for AT&T Sportsnet's broadcast of Rockets at Minnesota on Saturday, which happened at the same time as Astros-Phillies Game 6, the World Series clincher. So we decided to shelve it for a few days and come back once the Astros and the parade are now in the rearview mirror, although we'll definitely be basking in the glow for quite some time. But now I think we can at least focus a bit more on the Rockets, and it's a little bit easier to talk Rockets after a win as well. Don't want to make that to be bigger than it is, because for a lot of reasons, this is not a season in which you're going to judge them by wins and losses, but at least you saw some positive things in that Monday night victory in Orlando, starting with Jalen Green, 34 points on 12 of 18 shooting. We'll get to that as the podcast progresses, but I want to lead off talking about this incredible run by the Astros. Definitely a dynasty at this point. 6 years, 4 American League pennants, 2 World Series titles. And if there's any lessons to be taken for the Rockets, because I think there absolutely are a few. I know there are some on Twitter, I've seen it before, that recoil at the notion of these cross-sport comparisons. But at least from a team-building perspective, I do think there are some commonalities. And when you look at sort of the upper levels of decision-making, yeah, you do really see some themes that cut across baseball, basketball, football, whatever your sport may be, that can be used by executives in other sports. And I think this Astros run should really be highlighted, because it's not just this World Series, which of course is particularly feel good after they lost in 2019 and 2021. It shuts up the haters after all the sign stealing nonsense and the backlash the last couple of years. But I just think it's this run as a whole of just sheer dominance since 2017 and the sustainability. That's what the Rockets are trying to build. They're obviously a ways from getting there, but we hope that what the Rockets are doing now is analogous to where the Astros were in the early 2010s, that 2011 through 2013 range, when they were really maximizing their draft capital. And then from 2015 onward is when the ascent began, and it led to them becoming the juggernaut that they are now. So when I look at this from a Rockets perspective, any lessons learned from everything that's happened with the Astros? The number one thing I would say, and the Rockets are already doing part of this, is find the market inefficiency. And in the Astros case, there's basically part one and part two. Part one was pretty simple, and everybody knows it. They tanked. They maximized their draft capital in the 2011 through 2014 range. It led to them getting big names like Carlos Correa, George Springer, Alex Bregman. Bregman was a comp pick for actually not signing Grady Aiken, but he resulted from their tanking. So that cuts across all sports. You know, when you're trying to build a championship contending sports team, that everybody else, there's 29 other teams, franchises trying to do the exact same thing that you are. So you've got to find the inefficiencies, because just trying is not enough. Everybody is trying. And of course, the thing that's disproportionately valuable when you're trying to build a contender relative to other teams is having those premium draft picks to get true blue chip talents. And that's what the Rockets are doing now. And we've seen it with Jalen Green. We hope we see it with Jabari Smith Jr. We'll talk about his struggles in just a few minutes. And the Rockets are probably going to get one more high pick next year, which perhaps you get lucky. That's Victor Wembanyama or Scoot Henderson. We'll see. As far as the second half of the Astros run, that to me is where it's actually more interesting because, of course, you can't tank indefinitely because at some point the players that you get from that wave of tanking start to come up and they're going to make you better. And so you're not going to get high first round picks. So you're going to have to find some other market inefficiency to give you a leg up on your competitors. And in the case of the Astros, what it really is international scouting and international deals because MLB does not put most of its international players in the draft system. There's a separate posting arrangement for those guys. And the way the Astros have just dominated Latin America in recent years, really the story of this particular Astros World Series champion in 2022 is just the homegrown pitching, which is economically friendly. And you look at guys like Framber Valdez, Christian Javier, Brian Abreu, Luis Garcia, Jose Urquidy. There are so many just cheap internal replacements that they've brought up. And it feels like every time they let a veteran pitcher go, like Garrett Cole, Charlie Morton, Dallas Keuchel, it doesn't matter because they can replace that production internally. And that's so crucial in a sport where baseball doesn't have the salary cap that the NBA does, but they have what's called a competitive balance tax. That's basically, it acts as a salary cap. And to sort of make your organization sustainable to where you can put a contender out there year after year, you're not going to financially be able to pay everyone what they're worth to keep that initial team together. That's just not how it works. So you've got to have some way to sort of replenish your stockpile internally. And the Astros, the first part of it, of course, you would love to just draft these guys, but it's tougher when you're not drafting high. And in the case of the Astros, because the sign stealing, they actually didn't have first and second round picks at all in 2020 or 2021. So these international guys are just crucial to giving them the pipeline to keep this sustainable and replace some of that production at a more reasonable rate. And then you can pick and choose when you make your heavier investments, which they have for guys like Jose Altuve, Alex Bregman, Justin Verlander, and so on and so forth. So I would just say find the market inefficiency. The easy one, of course, is tanking and getting high draft picks because I think in any sport, getting true top shelf talents is a difference maker in terms of setting your rebuild apart from others. But then after that, you've got to figure out ways to do it without strictly having high draft picks. And for the Astros, it's international scouting. At the start of the Daryl Morey era, I think there was a clear inefficiency in the NBA on volume three-point shooting. Not everyone realized how important that is. Right now, I think teams have largely adjusted to that. So now you're going to have to find some new market inefficiency. That's the challenge for Rafael Stone. To me, that's sort of the lesson to be taken. The other two, and I'll go more quickly because I know we want to spend this to a bit more micro than macro. We want to talk about what happened between the Rockets and Magic last night. But number one, find the market inefficiency. Number two, you've got to make some hard decisions and sometimes resist fan pressure. I lit into Jim Crane when they let Carlos Correa go in spring training. It turned out that I was wrong. Jeremy Pena was ready, and now he's the MVP of the LCS and the World Series. Sometimes you've got to do that, and you've got to trust your organization and make hard decisions. The reason I was skeptical, baseball is a sport where even very good prospects sometimes bust. It's incredibly unpredictable. As one example, the Mariners acquired Jared Kelenic from the Mets a couple of years ago for Edwin Diaz, that star closer. And Kelenic has really, really disappointed at the NBA, at the MLB level, excuse me, even though was supposed to be one of the best prospects in the sport. It's really hard. Jeremy Pena was supposed to be a very good prospect. I don't think anyone really considered him elite going into the year, but clearly they trusted that he was ready and that he was one of those guys that you could replace internally at a cheaper rate and then allow you to spend your money elsewhere as opposed to keeping Carlos Correa. That was a really hard call to make, and there were plenty of fans, including me, that were pressuring them and saying that they had to do this, but the Astros trusted their process. They made the hard decision. And I think that's something that could be important to the Rockets as soon as next summer, when the Rockets have all this cap room up to $60 million entering free agency. It may not make sense for the Rockets to spend all or even most of that, because who knows how attractive the Rockets are going to be coming off what appears to be another losing season. Houston's a good market. It is top 5 to 10 in the NBA. Hopefully that helps. But at the same time, it's not like they're going to be super sexy and people are going to be saying, well, just have one signing and they are ready to take off. No, the Rockets are incentivized to win because of the future draft pick obligations to Oklahoma City, but that doesn't mean that it's going to happen next offseason. And if you're the Rockets, you're much better off saving your money for a future year, or perhaps, I guess the ideal would be to take on a bad contract and basically roll it over, get an asset, and then sort of punt to the next year, perhaps your big fish in free agency, depending on exactly how the market shakes out. You can't just sign someone because you want to make a splash. And there's going to be some pressure on them after 3 straight losing seasons. There's going to be a lot of people in the local media. There's going to be a lot of sponsors and business partners that want the Rockets to be relevant again. And it's going to be incumbent upon Rafael Stone, GM of the Rockets, Tillman Fertitta, the owner, to resist that pressure and not spend just to spend. No, if the right guy isn't available, then you've got to make the hard decision that, hey, we're not going to tank necessarily, but let's not just spend to spend. Let's try and perhaps take on a bad contract for an asset, and let's roll that financial flexibility forward a year and strike while the iron is hot. And maybe it's not even by free agent signing at all. Maybe it's by trade. But the bottom line is you've got to have the courage to stand up as an organization for what you believe in, even if there's people like me that are saying you should do this. That's not really something that you should be bound by, because people like me are wrong a lot. Kudos to the Astros, and the Rockets are going to have their own challenge next summer, potentially. I mean, you never say never. Maybe there is a free agent that's willing to go to Houston and it makes sense, but you shouldn't just spend that $50 to $60 million simply because you can. It needs to make sense, because if you spend it just to get relevant again, that's a ticket to potentially just being mediocrity treadmill, 40 to 45 wins, but not actually contending. The third and final lesson that I would take from the Astros run for the Rockets: don't be married to a specific timetable. I think on social media, and it's because nobody wants to be accused of being overly optimistic and ratioed and stuff like that, people tend to look at it as stair-stepping in terms of, okay, the Rockets are going to win 20 to 25 games this year, and then maybe next year they get closer to the play-in. The year after that, they win 45 and get into, a bottom tier playoff seed. The year after that, maybe they get into Western Conference Finals contention. And then the year after that, you try to actually build a contender. And it's sort of like stair stepping each year. That's not necessarily how it happens. It can happen slower, or it can happen very, very quickly. In the case of the Astros, we saw them be the worst team in baseball from 2011 through 2013. Wasn't even close. 2014, they improved a little bit to 70 and 92, but nothing great. 2015, they led the division most of the year, won the wild card game at Yankee Stadium, and they actually led the eventual World Series champion Royals 2-1 in the ALDS with a 4-run lead in the 8th inning. They were 6 outs from eliminating the Royals with a 4-run lead. Unfortunately, the Royals struck back, just a devastating loss, and KC went on to win the series. But the point is, 2015 was way ahead of schedule. But once you started getting the players, and then they supplemented those with some trades, I know people will hate it because Mike Fiers is what he is now. But, the Mike Fiers and Carlos Gomez trade, the 2015 deadline, did give them a better shot to win that particular year. Ironically, Paolo, you may not remember this, but Mike Fiers had a no-hitter for the Astros against the Dodgers. Do you remember that? Or has anybody told you that story before?
All I know about Mark Fiers is he's supposed to be the guy
rat.
the rat. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. Like the trade definitely is looked at negatively in hindsight because of everything that happened with sign stealing and what he did to those guys in the clubhouse. But in 2015, at least that year, he did provide like baseball value, and that team jumped very, very quickly. And if you're the Rockets, if that starts to happen, you never know when your window is going to be open. You never know when it's going to close. And so if you have an opportunity to make your team better in a year in which you're slightly better than expected, then you've got to jump on that. I would say a parallel from the Daryl Morey Rockets is that 2016 to 2017 season, the first year of Mike D'Antoni. They were coming off of 41-41. Nobody really expected much at all going into that season, and yet they were very aggressive at the deadline. They were second or third in the West for most of the year. They made the trade for Lou Williams, and that sort of kept them where they were. They ended up winning 55 games, I believe, lost to the Spurs in the second round. And then, Lou Williams was part of the deal that brought them Chris Paul. And even though it didn't necessarily bring them a title that year, I do think it was sort of, the idea was to strike while the iron is hot. And they didn't sort of subscribe to the theory that, hey, we weren't really supposed to be this good this year, so let's just sort of bide our time. No, they were aggressive, and then I do think that they reaped the rewards of that in the ensuing offseason. I guess number one, Lou was part of the package that got them Chris Paul, but more than that, I think people saw the Rockets and the franchise in a different light, and it made them go a lot quicker, because when the Rockets were coming off 41-41, I don't think people necessarily expected them to bounce back as quickly as they did. But that was the reality. And so you've got to be flexible. And, this is obviously not a story for this year because the Rockets are 2-9. But a year or two from now, if the Rockets are having a season where things are coming together much more quickly than maybe the expectations were going in, you've got to be able to, if you're Rafael Stone, if you're Tillman Fertitta, to recalibrate on the fly. And sometimes it's going to make sense to say, hey, this is a year that I've got to invest on, the front end for the advantage of perhaps you hope that it leads to a championship and that you just get better on the floor. But regardless, there's advantages to your team being seen as more desirable, and that you're sort of making that leap up the desirability rankings, if you will, for off-season trades, free agency, whatever it may be, to get you to that next step. And I do think that's something that in 2015, when the Astros sort of spun the timetable forward, it helped them to where in 2017, it was actually the 2016 offseason, they were able to sign guys like Josh Reddick, Brian McCann, that put them over the top to supplement all that young talent. And ultimately, it was ahead of schedule. There was an interview with Jeff Luneau, the original architect of this generation's Astros, now not with the team because Jim Crane, the owner, let him go after the sign stealing scandal. I forget the interview. I don't have it in front of me right now, but he actually mentioned that he viewed going in 2019 would be the start of their window for 7 to 10 years. 2017, despite the Sports Illustrated cover for the Astros internally, 2017 was actually a bit early, but they were open to the timetable. They hit enough of those early draft picks, and they won a World Series in 2017, and they nearly won one in 2015. So that's the other thing I would say in terms of Astros Rockets too. Don't be married to a specific timetable. You've got to be opportunistic, strike while the iron is hot. And so to me, those are the three takeaways. Find the market inefficiencies, make the hard decisions, and don't be married to a timetable. To me, those are the three macro level, just basically executive level decisions that the Astros have made to their benefits that hopefully the Rockets can benefit from in the years ahead. Paolo, I know you were not following the Astros 10 years ago, but just what are your thoughts looking at this run as far as takeaways from the way they've built this team and potentially how that can apply to what the Rockets are trying to do with this rebuild?
Yeah, I think from what you said, right, I obviously I only became a fan this year, but from what you said, there's easy parallels to when you talk about market inefficiencies, for example. Tanking is not the only way of building a team. Yes, 100%. But it's the most, the safest way in the sense of it provides you a little bit of an advantage. It's a little bit of a market inefficiency in itself, even with the new lottery odds, because you're guaranteed to get a top prospect. You're guaranteed to have a chance to draft someone good, right? And then it's up to your competence to make the right decision. So that's a little bit of a market inefficiency. The fact that you can tank is that's why it's exploited by so many teams. It's because there's value there. And then from there on, after you draft those players, they are on rookie contracts. Rookie contracts, the last 2 years, if you nail your picks, the last 2 years of a rookie contract is usually another market inefficiency. Luka Doncic has been an all-star on a rookie contract for God knows, I think he's not on his rookie contract anymore. For 3 years, he was an all-star on a rookie contract.
Yep.
Ja Morant, the same thing. Trae Young, the same thing. Jalen Green could be next year an all-star on a rookie contract, right? And so that's another market inefficiency. After you draft your guys, if they hit, you're going to have a couple of years where they're making substantially less money than what they're worth. And during that time is when you want to sign the free agents you want to sign, make a push, and become a playoff team. And then from there on, it's about keeping the right guys. The Astros did the exact same thing from what you're telling me. They decided, okay, Altuve is an important guy to keep here for the culture. Alex Bregman is an extremely hard worker. He's another guy that's going to set the standard for everybody else. Everybody across the here talks about how people go to the Astros and they maximize what they are as players because it's what's expected of you, and you create that culture thing. In the NBA, it's the same thing as well. There's going to be hard decisions to be made. It's about picking the right guys, and it's about creating it after you get the advantages through tanking. You don't want to finish your tanking process just scraping by for a playoff spot. You want to finish your tanking process with some assets left in the tank to fuel your rebuild across the next 4 or 5 years. And then you hope to hit on a couple of draft picks that keep you there even longer, right? But that's generally the cycle for an NBA team. And so after that, with those draft assets, you want to keep making the right bets so that you're one of those teams like the Heat, where a guy like Max Strus comes in and, hey, this guy's a valuable contributor, and nobody knew about it. Basically, everybody that goes to the Heat contributes to a level where they wouldn't in some other teams. And so I think that's what the Rockets are trying to do. And the other thing I would bring up that I'm not sure how it applies to the Astros, but that's really important for the Rockets, is optionality. You don't want to lock yourself into something that you can't get out of for too long. We've seen this. You remember I just talked about the advantage that is having Luka Doncic, an all-star on a rookie contract. Well, the Mavs basically negated that advantage because they signed Kristaps Porzingis. It was a trade, but it was a trade and extend, whatever the specifics were. They maxed him right away. And he wasn't a max-worthy guy. His injuries immediately got to him, and they lost the advantage they had having Luka on such a small deal because they had Kristaps Porzingis on this huge deal that isn't worth nearly what he's playing for, right? And so, at the same time, going into next year, you don't want to just, as you said, sign a guy. Just keep optionality, keep flexibility. The Knicks did this. The Knicks are not an example of a greatly run organization, but one of the smartest things they've done in the last few years is the year before they got back to the playoffs, they signed a bunch of guys to 2+1 deals, 1+1 deals, just basically the entire story about delaying your cap space. They did that. Bobby Portis was one of these guys. Julius Randle, who ended up being the catalyst for their playoff run, was one of these guys. If the Knicks going into that season where they had all of that cap space had drafted well beforehand, they would have been in a great position. They just didn't do the first steps correctly. The Rockets apparently have done the first steps correctly. Jalen Green appears to be a hit. Tari Eason appears to be a really promising player. Jabari Smith hasn't looked good, but doesn't take much for him to look good. Alperen Sengun might be another one of those guys. So taking bets like that next year is going to be key as well, because as we know nowadays in the NBA, you don't always get the stars, and you don't even usually get the stars through free agency anymore. So that's another one of the things that I would highlight.
Yeah, to your point on optionality, I would say the Astros' fixation on contract lengths is something that's really worked to their benefit. I think it's not an exact parallel for the NBA, because obviously the NBA, for most players, 4 years is the max. There are some exceptions that you can get a 5-year deal, but you don't have these 9-10-year contracts that MLB hands out. But I do think that it should be underscored. The Astros have done a really good job of giving themselves outs. For example, in 2019, it wasn't realistic to give new contracts to both Justin Verlander and Garrett Cole. Some people wanted them to give the contract to Garrett Cole because he's obviously far younger, but they gave the 2-year deal to Justin Verlander, then gave him another, basically a 1+1 last offseason. And to this point, clearly it's worked out. Justin Verlander was actually better than Garrett Cole this year, even though he's 39 years old coming off of Tommy John surgery. But the point is, they were able to get Justin Verlander on these short-term deals because of his age. And then that really helps you with team building because you're not locked into that moving forward. It may make sense for you to pay $35-40 million annually. This year was actually just like 25, I believe, to a guy like Justin Verlander for a given year, but you don't know if it's going to make sense 5-6 years down the road. And that's why that 10-year deal is so limiting when you give those out, because you don't know how the rest of your team, what the composition is going to be moving forward. And so it really locks you into one particular path, as opposed to the way the Astros have done it. And they're developing so much pitching internally. There may come a point as soon as this offseason where they say, you know what, we've got so much cheap alternatives with Framber, Javier, Brian Abreu potentially could figure into the starting mix, Hunter Brown, those types of players, that it makes sense for us to allocate that $35 million to Justin Verlander somewhere else on this roster, because I've got so much cost-efficient production through the internal pipeline. And because of the focus on contract structure, the Astros are able to reap the benefits of that. And hopefully that's something that the Rockets can do as well. Not a literal 1-for-1, because again, there's no 10-year contracts in the NBA, but just in terms of the general priority of making sure that you have the most paths possible to build your contender in future years. I think that's the parallel, right?
Yeah, and they've done so far. We've seen it. They've given themselves as many shots possible at players that will be underpaid by the time they're trying to compete, because that's when it actually matters. Cap space is okay when you're a rebuilding team, but most of the time you're going to be using that cap space to take on bad salary in exchange for assets that you can, leave in your wallet to spend, or leave in your piggy bank to spend whenever you're good. You only really care about contract efficiency when you're actually competing, because you're trying to extract the max amount of talent out of that cap space, out of the however much it is on any given year. They've done so with Jason Tate, and they've been really smart about it. If we go back to Jason Tate's contract, everybody thought that it was an underpay, and then the actual structure came out, and it's even more of an underpay. They know they have the cap space lined up for next year, so they did a contract that starts at $7 million, goes back down to $6.5 million, and then goes back up to $7 million the year after. The third year is a team option, so a lot of optionality. Garrison Matthews is on a contract that's non-guaranteed for the entirety of it. They go through all 4 years, and they can get out whenever they want. They should nix the same thing. The largest one, KPJ's extension, is very much one of the most flexible contracts for a player of that caliber we've ever seen. Usually these guys either get, usually it's as simple as you get overpaid for more team control, or you get underpaid for more player control, or for no team control, right? The Rockets just blew off that scale and said, hey, we're going to get all of the team control. And it's so much team control that it doesn't matter if you're overpaid, because if we feel you're overpaid, we can just get out of it at basically any point. So they we've got reason to believe that they are aware of these market inefficiencies. Jason Tate himself, as a player, is exploiting a market inefficiency. They got him from New Zealand for free, and he's clearly someone who can contribute to the NBA. So they got, I think KJ Martin was the second round pick that they bought out of the guy.
Yep.
And it wasn't even out of college. He went to IMG Academy, if I'm not mistaken. He wasn't basically on anybody's radar, and he has proven to be, he has potential to be a really good role player. Just getting guys that can fill a role is another market inefficiency, because everybody's looking for shot creation and stuff like that. And these role players, as Daryl Morey kind of taught us, you can go find these guys. It doesn't take much to develop a guy into, I can transition from this into Jabari Smith. If I don't know if you have anything else you want to touch on the Astros.
No, I was just going to mention very briefly that your point on culture was really well stated. I think that's an underrated part of this. And the Rockets seem to get that as well, just in terms of having the right guys internally. That perhaps plays into the role of veteran Eric Gordon right now, a guy that people have wondered, why is he still here? We'll talk about him as well. But the Astros have really been through the ringer the last couple of years with the sign stealing and the aftermath of that, and went from AJ Hinch to Dusty Baker. And one reason it didn't affect them is because on the hitting side, they've got Jose Altuve and Alex Bregman. The pitching side, you've had Justin Verlander and Lance McCullers as the constant. Those guys set the standards. And yeah, to me, that culture internally is something that even switching managers, it never changed, because the standard is there inside that clubhouse. And you've got to, when you're trying to build a contender, have some of those guys that, it can't just be the coaching staff. You've got to have guys that are actually playing, that set that standard and hold their teammates accountable as well. Hopefully Jabari Smith is one of those guys. Well, I think clearly, he has the intangibles off the court. At some point, his on-court production is going to have to match that. Now, he's only played 10 games, and he's 19 years old, so it's not time to press the panic button. But I think long-term, that's part of the role for him that maybe some of the louder detractors on social media don't get. It's not just on the court, it's off the court as well, that hopefully you see something from Jabari Smith Jr. because on the court, it's been a rough start for him, to say the least. And then the guy who he was compared to, Paolo Banchero, 30 points last night, 50% shooting. Jabari, 3 points on 1 of 4 from 3 in 22 minutes. It didn't look pretty. Now, the Rockets did win the game, of course, 134 to 127, which I think is psychologically significant. Jalen, as I mentioned off the top, had a huge night, and it at least brings hope. It at least plays into the idea that some of the struggles to start the year, that 1-19 start, well, I guess number one, you're not going to start 1-16 like last year, thank God. And secondly, it does bring some hope that perhaps some of the struggles can be attributed to the tough schedule. We knew this going in. 10 of their first 13 are on the road, so many contenders, and it does, at least for one day, give you some optimism that, hey, as this schedule inevitably eases up, maybe you can start to see signs that we haven't seen yet. So it at least gives you a little bit of hope. But in terms of Jabari Smith, I think that's the one. You had so many positives last night. And yet Jabari, 3 points in 22 minutes, and going into that game, he wanted to make a statement against Paolo Banchero, the guy he was compared to in the pre-draft process. Paolo, number one. Surprisingly, many people thought Jabari would be number one, and then Jabari falling through to the Rockets. He did not look in the same landscape. Now, that's not shocking. Again, he's younger than Paolo. His body is not nearly as developed. There are some obvious extenuating circumstances, but right now it's not pretty. Paolo, I'll sort of turn that over to you because I know you were a Paolo guy prior to the draft. What do you make of just the striking discrepancy in their play to this point? And, how worried, if at all, should Rockets fans be by this?
Yeah, so you're hearing it from me, right? It would be the easiest thing ever for me to sit here and go take a victory lap and say, oh my God, look how right I was about Paolo, look how right I was about Jabari. The truth is, Jabari has been what we projected him to be. And Paolo has been what I projected him to be. Some people didn't believe, but Jabari has been, and he was projected to be, right. This guy is his realistic, I'm not going to call it ceiling, but his realistic outcome is he's going to be one of the best 3-and-D role players in the league. That's going to provide extra value in how much he can switch, because people usually say, oh, it's just a 3-and-D wing. There's a spectrum of outcomes for a 3-and-D wing. You've got the 3-and-D wings that can shoot but can't defend, the Ben McLemores of the world. You've got the ones that can defend, and I'm going to keep this in Rockets terms so I don't mention players from the outside. Then you've got the 3-and-D wings that can defend really well, but the shooting is hopeful. The Thavos Afalocias of the world, for example. And then you've got the guys that can both shoot and defend but don't have the length. Or don't have the size to hold up, and then you've got and then you start training upwards, and you've got the guys that are good at both and have the size but don't have the IQ, Daniel Houses of the world. Then you eventually get to the guys who are really truly elite 3-and-D players. You've got the Mikal Bridges of the world that are really good shooters and really good defenders. And then eventually you get to a point, and this is what you think Jabari Smith could be, which is a 3-and-D player that can legitimately switch 1 through 5 and be a sharpshooter. That's what you think Jabari would be. And it is labeled as a 3-and-D role player because that's what it is, but that's incredibly valuable. And if you add onto it the leadership aspect of it, and him setting a little bit of a defensive culture and holding other guys accountable and be kind of that defensive leader, that's even more valuable, especially to a rebuilding team, which is usually all offense, no defense. The good thing about Jabari is these skill sets are the easiest to develop in the NBA. Mm-hmm. Right. The hardest thing to develop is shot creation, in my opinion. The hardest thing to develop is handle creativity. Those things that's why Jalen Green is perhaps a riskier prospect, because, well, if Jalen can't score for himself, can't generate advantages by himself, then there isn't much there, right? And we've since seen that he can leverage his athleticism for now to create those advantages, whether it is moving off the ball, whether it is just verticality and just, straight line drives to the rim and how he can move and contort his body to get some crazy finishes, and the touch he has and the shooting that he has, we've seen that Jalen Green has proved to be, and most people are confident that he will be, one of those shot creating stars. The thing with Jabari is, listen, he's got the tools when it comes to on the defensive side to be insanely switchable, the insane length. He can move his feet really well. He has good instincts, right? That's not going to go away. It will take a little bit for him to settle into a role in the NBA because the game's faster. Everyone's stronger. He's fouling a lot, and he's he's realizing that every night's a different opponent, and defensively you've got to prepare for whatever matchup you're going to get. We saw how surprised he was by John Collins, who is not an offensive guru, but he is good at some very specific things. I think Jabari has struggled both offensively and defensively, but the tools are there defensively. And offensively, he's still shooting 89% from the free throw line, right? The shot isn't there, he's rushing it, but you can see that the touch is there. His slim shot's beautiful, right? He's not going to have to relearn how to shoot, but even if he had to, that's when you've got the touch, that's one of the easiest things to teach, and one of the easiest things to reform, and one of the easiest things to tweak into, because you're not expecting him to learn anything groundbreaking, right? He's going to be incredibly valuable when his shot comes back and when he gets more used to what playing defense looks like at the NBA level. And that can take, he has time to get that down. For the Rockets, it doesn't really matter how good he is year one. And he was never going to be really good year one on a bad team because, as I said, he's a player that mostly plays off the ball. Could the Rockets do a better job of getting him more looks, having him curl off of screens, having him run plays actually for him? Yes, they could. But at the same time, the Rockets guards are not doing a good job of consistently giving him looks. And so sometimes he'll take 2 threes in 3 minutes, and sometimes he'll go an entire quarter taking one shot. That's not good for his rhythm, right? That's right. A role player's job. And so he's getting inconsistent reps and inconsistent situations in where he gets the ball. And so that's not helping as well. But I'm not worried long term, because as the team, Jabari is very much one of those players that as the team gets better, he'll look better as well. If you plugged in Robert Covington into where Jabari Smith is right now, Robert Covington would never look like a guy that fetched 2 first-round picks 2 years in a row, like back-to-back years. And at the trade deadline when he came to Houston, and and at the end of the year before the Harden scandal when he left. It's just that type of player is not gonna do well in these circumstances. Could he be shooting better? Yes, he could. Could he be playing better defense? Yes, he could. He could have. He can be looking better than what he is right now. But the fact that he isn't doing so isn't worrying me as much as it would worry me if, for example, Paolo Banchero coming in was all of a sudden wasn't getting advantages on players. If we switch the logic to him, he is a shot creator, right? If he's coming into the league and he's not being able to create advantages and scoring off of them, and then at that point, then you get worried, because those are the hard things to develop. So it's just, he was a low risk pick, right? He was never meant to look like, he could look good, but he wasn't meant to look great on a bad team. And he's going to be one of those guys that, as the team improves, he'll improve as well. And I don't think it's unrealistic to say 2 years from now, or even next year, Jabari Smith looks a lot better with a better team around him. And 2 years from now, he's shooting 39% from 3, and he's playing good switchable defense. I don't think that when you look at him play, I don't think that sounds unrealistic. And ultimately, that's what you need out of him. You didn't draft him for him to be KD-like. You didn't draft him for him to be, Jalen Green's scoring like partner. No, you drafted him for his defense. You drafted him for his floor spacing. That was what was on the scouting report. And those are things that are heavily team dependent. And the team isn't good, so you can't really expect much more.
Let me ask you a more short-term question. One thing that stood out to me last night, he played only 22 minutes. We've seen a lot of times this season, Steven Silas treats him differently because, again, he is the number 3 overall pick. He's up there with Jalen Green, and that typically, even if they're struggling, you just let them play it out. The same way Jalen Green was 0 of 11 in that Warriors game last year that they lost on the Steph buzzer beater, and they just left him out there because, for the most part, you're just going to sink or swim with him as your guy. He's in a different tier than most of the prospects. We saw a little bit of a shift in that against Orlando. Played only 22 minutes, and actually the fourth quarter of that game, it was Tari Eason who's a bit more developed. It makes sense because Tari's 21 years old. He's had 2 years of high-level college basketball. It was actually Tari playing where Jabari would have been, and Tari had a couple of big plays one-on-one defensively isolated against Paolo Banchero, and at one point he ripped him and got the steal and drove in for an uncontested dunk. Just a really flashy highlight level play. And we know the type of energy and defense that Tari can potentially bring. The question is where the minutes come from, because when everyone is playing, you do have a fairly deep forward rotation. You're starting Eric Gordon at the 3, Jabari starts, then you've got KJ Martin off the bench. You've got Jason Tate, who's barely played this year, but at some point he is going to play. Potentially Usman Garuba could fit into that mix as well. You've got so many options, and we've really heard it ever since training camp. Tari Eason deserves the play. The question is where the minutes come from. And in this game, I think at least a few of them, Jabari played 22, Tari played 20. Some of them came from Tari taking minutes in the fourth quarter that would have otherwise went to Jabari, with Steven Silas basically saying, F it, we need to win this game. And you're not on a back-to-back. We know the struggles that they were in that 6-game losing streak, 1-9 to start the year. And it wasn't just the two of them. Jalen Green, Kevin Porter Jr., they each played 38 minutes. It felt like Steven Silas looked at this as a game they just had to win and treated it aggressively. And sometimes that makes sense. You do need some wins from time to time to build the culture, to keep guys in the right frame of mind. I agree with that. But I just think it's interesting that clearly Tari Eason did take some minutes that going into the game you would think were earmarked for Jabari Smith Jr. Is that a long-term strategy? Is that just a one-game Band-Aid? What do you think about the concept of them doing that as a means of getting Tari to 20 minutes?
I think it's acceptable. I think they've done it this year. I think it's important to mention that Jabari was in foul trouble since very early on in the game. And so Paolo, and he was the primary defender on Paolo. And if there's one of the most highlight-worthy things that Paolo has done in his first year in the NBA is, I think he's throwing something crazy like 8 free throws a game. Right? And if Jabari has more fouls, you need a body to throw at Paolo that doesn't have to play. And we've seen so far in the season that Jabari, when he has more fouls, he plays like it. He acknowledges that he has more fouls, and he, doesn't play defense as tight as he would without it. Last year, Sengun was someone who, regardless of how many fouls he had, he would play basically the same way. Jabari is not the same thing. When Jabari has fouls, he tones it down. And so because of that, and because of how good of a game Paolo was having, I think it makes sense from a trying to win standpoint to play Tari there. Also because, well, if Paolo is going to be driving into you, I think Tari might be a better option right now. I think he's stronger than Jabari, and so, and he has quicker hands, and Paolo has a good handle, but he's not a guard, right? He length and quick hands will get to him, and we saw that. I think he had like 5 turnovers last night. Like, he doesn't have the tightest handle, and he's going to use a lot of power to score and to draw fouls. And I think Tari is the better matchup defensively, so I think it makes sense. But going forward, while I don't mind doing this when Jabari is clearly having a bad game, he's 1 for 4, he's got 4 fouls, got 3 turnovers, he's clearly not beating like a good presence on the floor. I think it's okay. I think they've also done earlier in this year in Jabari's career high, where the game against Utah that they won, when he had 21 points, 9 rebounds, 2 assists. He was playing with 5 fouls for a big percentage of that game, or he was playing in foul trouble for a big percentage of that game, and they kept him in. As long as we have the common sense to play him if he's having a good game in that regard, then I think it's okay. But ideally, I would still rather, have from the get-go, from the start of the game, the plan B, let's get Jabari to his 30 minutes and let's get Tari at least 20. Because Tari has been incredible. And people have talked about like Tari coming out of high school, or not coming out of high school, coming out of college when he was drafted. The question was his 3-point shot. Everybody knew he was going to be a good defender. Everybody knew he was going to be a good rebounder, extremely productive player. The question was, can he space the floor? And he's not a knockdown shooter, and the percentage he has right now is probably not indicative of what it's going to be when the season comes to an end. But he is shooting 50% from 3 on 2 attempts a game. And that's 2 attempts a game might not seem like a lot, 2.3 attempts, but when you only play 18 minutes, that's a pretty good volume. And if he's not struggling to shoot, you've got he's a 6'8", 3-and-D wing. You've got to find. He's 21 years old. If he's one of your best rebounders, you've got to find a way to get him minutes. I don't care if it's Garrison Matthews, Eric Gordon, Jason Tate, KJ Martin, maybe not as much because he's proving to be a really valuable player as he was last night. But you've got to find a way to get him into the rotation as a fixture, not as someone whose minutes are dictated by other players. Kind of like what Josh Christopher was for a large part of last season. He was producing. You've got to and he's forcing himself onto the rotation. If it's somebody, you've got to find a stable way to include him in that rotation, regardless of what Jabari is giving you. He's another one of those guys that I think could be one of our defensive leaders going forward, because you can see that he demands more out of other people as well. And I think they need to, and I think most of the time he's playing power forward minutes. He is quick enough to guard 2s and 3s for the most part. And so you've got to make the jump you made with KJ Martin this year and stop looking at him as solely a power forward and play him at the 3 as well. Because when Silas unlocks that in his rotation patterns, then you don't have to take the minutes away from Jabari. You can take the minutes away from Garrison Matthews or Eric Gordon himself, who's been playing more than he played last season. So I think that's another big step that they need to take that they took a little while to take with KJ.
Yeah, and that segues into our next talking point. I got to ask you about Eric Gordon. First off, we did not have a show last week, so before we get into the X's and O's of, I guess, the on-court play and also the rotation considerations, when you got ratioed into the sun by Eric Gordon after the Clippers game, you pointed out pretty much the same thing that I and other people pointed out, just with a bit less of a filter, how silly it was that the Rockets, when the game was tied with 40 seconds left and then trailing by 2 in the final 10 seconds, ran their plays both times for Eric Gordon because, of course, on paper for a rebuilding team, that's an ideal spot to run something through one of the prospects you're trying to develop. Kevin Porter Jr., Jalen Green, Alperen Sengun, someone like that. Eric Gordon, 33 years old. I don't know what you're trying to do long-term by giving him those types of high-usage plays. I tend to agree that Jackson Gatlin has pointed out that EG is sort of the security blanket for Silas. I do think that maybe the Rockets learned from that. I saw late in the Orlando game, they weren't quite as EG heavy, and I think it served them well. Now, granted, Orlando is not as good of a team as the Clippers, so that could play into it as well. The Clippers do have better defense than the Magic do. That's 100% truth. So it remains to be seen exactly long-term how this plays out. But before we even go into, I guess, the discussion of where the minutes come from and where Eric Gordon fits long-term, I got to ask, and again, in fairness to Eric, some people will say, well, why is he responding? Look, when your Twitter followers are 230,000 like his are, and you see your name trending after the game, and I'm sure you click on it, it can feel like an insult, even if it's not. Your point was not to insult him. It was not about Eric Gordon not being a good basketball player. He is. Your point was about why does it make sense for him to get those reps on a rebuilding team in this particular situation? And the nuance can get lost when people are just saying bad things about you and you log in and you're trending. If you haven't had that many followers, my general advice to people listening would be to just take a step back, breathe, and if you haven't been in his shoes, don't judge him. It's a little bit different. when you're in that position. With that said, from your position, Paolo, you went to sleep, you wake up, and your mentions are in shambles. What the hell is that like?
I don't know. So for context, my tweet was, as you said, about I ironically posted what Silas come up with a play for Eric Gordon here talking about a play in the clutch. And truth is, he did 2 times in a row. One was a turnover. Then Eric proceeded to get scored on, which, listen, it was a tough shot. He played good defense, not his fault. And then they set up another play for Eric where he missed a layup. And I'm like, well, you guys know I don't care about the win, but it's like you've got to kind of make up your mind. You're either trying to get the win, you're trying to get wins, in which case, well, you're doing a poor job of doing so because the team's not winning.
Right.
Or you're trying to develop, in which case Jalen Green and KPJ are better options for a late, a clutch play. We've seen and just as a fan, right? We are also fans at the same time. Those moments where it's a close game. There's very few meaningful games in a tanking team season, and on those few games where there is something that's meaningful, it's a close game. Let's high intensity. You should be giving those reps to your young guys. And as a fan, those are the moments that you'll remember at the end of the season. If I ask most people what their favorite moments were from last season, most of them will say KPJ's game winner against Washington, KPJ's game winner against Utah, Jalen Green going off against the Lakers in overtime. Those are the moments that are memorable. And so it makes, from a fan perspective, it makes sense. From a development perspective and a team building perspective, it makes sense. It was not a shot at Eric Gordon as well, like at all. It's very much because of that, and not because I don't think Eric Gordon can win the game for us. I think Eric Gordon can win the game for us. I just don't think that's the priority here.
Right.
Or that should be the priority. I know, it's different for when they're playing or for the guys that are trying to win the game. But that was where I was coming from, and so when he came at me, I was like, well, this is one of those weird situations where he clearly didn't get what I meant.
Yeah.
And he is someone on the team, so I need to be really careful with where I respond with. So I kind of my first instinct was I'll make a joke out of it, and so I quote tweeted and I said, "Hi, Eric," and so after making a joke out of it, I actually gave him a serious response, and I said, "Here's what the tweet meant. It's not funny that you missed the shot, not at all. It's funny that this is something that's been going on with Silas and that people are tired of seeing, and that just happened again." And listen, besides that episode, and just talking about Eric Gordon in general, he's been disconnected playing defense this season, even worse than he was last season. He's not trying. Well, let's be honest. Last season he would not try, but when he was, one-on-one against guys, he'd play his usual pretty lockdown defense. This season he's like letting rebounds just, go by him, not getting to balls that he could very easily get to. He's not here mentally. We saw how disconnected he was when Jabari and Jalen had that little, exchange on the bench. Eric was just like, I'm too old for this. And if that's the vibe that Eric's on, I don't know how much culture-wise, and I'm not there to know, but I don't know how much you can expect him to bring culture-wise if he's not, invested.
And let me add on very quickly. I think another element to this, besides just the culture, minutes are getting harder to come by. We talked about Tari and Jabari earlier. As we're recording this podcast on Tuesday morning, there's a report that leaked from Kelly Eco that KJ Martin is open to a contract extension. He's played really well the past week. 3 of the 4 games, he's had 17 or more points. The win against the Magic, he had 21 points, shot 57% from the field, 50% on threes, had 5 assists, 2 blocks. He talks in Kelly's article, KJ, that is, about being a connector. And it's getting tough to play all these guys. And Jason Tate has not even really played this year, other than a couple of games due to an ankle injury. And we hope that Jabari is going to get better and Tari is going to get better, and these guys are going to warrant more playing time as they improve throughout their rookie seasons. So even if Eric Gordon provides value in terms of culture, which I think he does. I'm wondering if it makes sense as we get closer to the trade deadline for the Rockets to trade Eric, not necessarily for the value. In the past, it's been, well, we'll trade him if someone meets our price of a first round pick within certain parameters. But if not, he provides value to the team in other ways, which he does. But at this point, I'm wondering if that type of value is sort of offset by the fact that if he plays, well, he's going to play 30 minutes. And then that's going to make it really harder to play guys like Jabari, Tari, KJ, Tate. At some point, assuming health, there's only so many minutes to go around. And at this point, I'm just worried about how do you do it? Like, even if you take a little bit less value than you like, you might have to move Eric Gordon simply because otherwise you're not going to have the developmental minutes to come from. Does that make sense?
No, yeah, that makes total sense. And the only thing that makes me kind of think that they might not do it is he plays the 3 in the starting lineup, but they see him as more of a ball handler, and the guys we're trying to give minutes to aren't like kind of ball handler type, which I disagree with, which I think, we saw the quote from Silas saying, oh, he likes Eric Gordon because he needs a lead ball handler with Jalen Green's on the floor. And I'm like, okay, Silas. In my opinion, what should happen is, well, Jalen Green's on the floor, let him be the lead ball handler, and you can trade Eric Gordon and slot in a 3-and-D wing around him, be that Tari Eason, KJ Martin, whoever it is. But I think that's maybe one of the reasons they won't do it, but they should, in my opinion. Because, hey, KJ Martin is having a great season. He projects to be a good 3-and-D player. Those are valuable, especially on the contract that he's on.
And speaking of, I think it sounds great to potentially extend him. He's only 21 years old. He seems to be a great fit. He's very self-aware, talks about his value as a connector in the interview with Kelly Iko, which you don't often hear young players talk about themselves in those terms. I would just say that similar to Jason Tate a year ago, it makes sense to wait until the offseason because there's no reason for the Rockets to bid against themselves and prematurely cut into their salary cap room for a KJ extension when they have him under contract already for next season. To me, the move to make is to just shelve this until the offseason and basically add on KJ to whatever you do with that money, that financial flexibility that you have going in, and then you can extend KJ on the back end as opposed to negotiating on the front end and prematurely taking away some of your financial flexibility. To me, use the Jason Tate template, and if you're going to extend KJ, take that up after the first wave of free agency and trades next offseason. Sorry for interjecting. Just wanted to sort of clarify the timetable with the finances.
Yeah, you're right, and I agree with you. Depending on what he's willing to take now. If he's willing to take a Jason Tate type deal, hey, go sign him because I don't.
Okay, I guess that's fair. Yeah, if the deal is good enough now, then there is it's a sliding scale. If the deal is so insanely good now that you fear that waiting until next offseason would lead to him asking for something completely different, then yeah, you do need to be at least open-minded. But yeah, generally speaking, unless it's like a crazy good deal, then to me the way to play it is just wait until next offseason. It's not like he's going to be a free agent anyway, and then try and sign him on top of your free agent wave.
Yeah, which is I think what happened with Jason because it made sense for them as well.
Waited until 1 year left. Yeah.
Yeah. But so if you're even more so if you're exploring extensions with KJ Martin, Eric Gordon's a good player, but I think considering his age and considering how good KJ Martin and Tari Eason in specific have looked, and that they're shooting the ball a lot better. KJ, percentage-wise, is not shooting a lot better, but his willingness to shoot it has been a lot better. And Tari Eason's just percentages have been better. He eventually will get to be more willing to shoot them. They've got more size. They're younger. They're more athletic. You need to see what you've got with them because next season you're going to have a lot of cap space, and who knows if the best free agent available isn't someone who's going to play the same position as them. So you need to get as much info as you can on them, and they look ready to do so. So you're not really hurting the product on the court. So I love Eric, and I told them when in my reply I told him this. I think he's a Rockets legend, but I think we've reached the point where if he has to play, and there's another solution, which is he willing to play less, right? But if he has to play 31 minutes a night like he's playing, that's just too big of a slice of the pie to take away from the most stacked position that they have, because for threes, and I'll call it threes and fours, because most of the fours can also play the three. You've got Jabari Smith, Tari Eason, KJ Martin, Jason Tate. You want to play Garrison Matthews for some reason. You've got Garuba, I'll count as a 5. That's 5 guys. And with Eric Gordon taking the biggest slice of the pie of those minutes, it just doesn't make much sense as a rebuilding team, especially when he's not giving you his all. So it's a tough decision, but it's a little bit of addition by subtraction as well. Because you've got to know what you have there.
Yeah. To close the loop, it feels like what you're suggesting is a role sort of closer to like Dennis Schroeder of a year ago, where you play 20 minutes off the bench as that veteran. I don't want to say backup point guard because clearly he has more positional flexibility than that. But for this particular team, his ball handling skills are especially important given the weakness that's behind Kevin Porter Jr. right now. So closer to 2021, 2022 Dennis Schroeder than the way the Rockets are currently using Eric Gordon. Is that fair?
Yeah, and there's parallels to this on other rebuilding teams, especially at shooting guard. For the Magic, who we just played, Terrence Ross,
good point,
over the last 2 years plays 23, 24, 25 minutes a night. That opens up minutes for them. They experimented with RJ Hampton, who was labeled as a point guard / shooting guard, to play some minutes on the wing as well. I think they did something similar with Gary Harris last year. It's one of those positions that's very plug and play. It's just the guy that can shoot and play defense. And if you've got a lot of guys that can shoot and play defense that are younger, you've got to do something about it. And I think another thing that might happen is you can always trade them, and if the team doesn't pick up his option or his non-guaranteed year next year, you could bring him back if you think he's that valuable. It could be just a see you soon rather than a hey, I'll let you walk off into the distance to a contender if he really wants to stay. It's tough, especially because if Eric Gordon were a backup point guard, for example, it would be a different story. You'd make the argument that maybe playing him over Knicks would make sense, considering how tough it's been with point guards on this team and just general guys to run the offense. Eric Gordon's not one of those guys. He plays one of those plug and play positions. He's demanding of really big minutes. So I wonder if that's something they consider going into the deadline, and I wonder if they'll lower their price, because I agree with their premise from beforehand that a late first round pick this year is not that appealing, because I don't think in a draft this good, it's usually hard to trade up. So I'm not sure how much of a needle mover that is. I suggested this before, but if they're trading him, I would try and look to get a protected swap, instead of maybe an outright first, if it means that the swap is 3-4 years down the line.
Yep. A couple more subjects before we wrap up. Kevin Porter Jr., I thought, was interesting in the Orlando game. He had 11 assists, which I believe is a season high, 17 points, 7 of 14 shooting, made 3 shots from 3-point range, had 7 unfortunate turnovers. It was such a fascinating fourth quarter, I thought. The Magic made a run early. The Rockets went up 16 late in the third quarter. The Magic cut it to 2, largely against Houston's bench unit. They put KPJ back in the game, and immediately, they put both KPJ and Jalen in, and the Rockets answered in a big way. They had a 9-0 run, and all 9 of those buckets were assisted by KPJ, 2 on threes, a third on a nice dime to Sengun for an and one inside. And that was the good. It felt like in that moment, he was a point guard, that he took over an offense. And granted, the Magic are young, so it's not exactly a veteran defense, but he took over, stabilized things, got good shots for his teammates, did exactly what you would like to see. And then as the game progressed, we mentioned the 7 turnovers, there were a couple of those 7 that were just staggering. It wasn't even like they were poor decisions, because clearly, especially in the half court, I think his processing speed has improved. He's making better reads. I do think there's been some growth in that area as the season has progressed. But just the fact that he's not a natural point guard, he just picked up his dribble a couple of times for no reason in the backcourt. And maybe some of that's because he's really the only ball handler for the Rockets amongst that closing unit, and he's not a natural point guard. But the bottom line is, even if it's not necessarily an issue of reads or processing speed, sometimes you just need a guy who can handle the ball and dribble his way out of trouble, and he's not a natural point guard. And turnovers are turnovers. So I'm just sort of torn. It's like you see the moments in which he actually is a really good facilitator, and 17 points, 11 assists. That's a really good line. His team won. He set up some big makes in the fourth quarter. And yet he also just has some baffling turnovers that are sort of, at least to me, they just remind you the fact that he's not a legitimate point guard, that this is an experiment. And the good thing is that with his contract, it's not like he has to be a point guard to be effective. You can move him to, a shooting guard, a small forward. He has the height at 6'6" and the shooting to still be viable. But it's just, it's an interesting game, because to me, the playmaking is getting better. You can see it in the half court, but then there's also these red flags that make you wonder, hey, against a really dialed in defense, can this be the primary ball handler? Where did you come away on that?
I think it was a better game. I think it supplements a weird feeling that I've been having, which is he seems to have two modes. When he's point guard mode, he doesn't score as well, and when he's scoring mode, he doesn't play make as well. And that's a very tough balance to strike, especially as a young player. That's why not many guys transition to point guard. It's one of the toughest transitions because it's a lot of feel. If we look at the game last night, if you look at his percentages, it doesn't scream in an inefficient game. He scored 17 points on 14 shots, shot 67% from two and 38% from three, good splits. But when you actually go back and if you remember the game, he took 8 threes, and I think his 3 makes were all catch and shoot, and the misses was mostly pull-ups, right?
Yep.
And we've known this about KPJ for a little bit, which makes me think, and I love KPJ, and this is not a demotion. I think he'll be more suited when we are good to being a 6-man. Which doesn't mean that they should do anything about it right now, because
yeah, there's not an alternative.
Yeah, and there's not an alternative. And other rebuilding teams, the Jazz are doing fine with a bunch of guys that I would label as 6-mans leading their offense. Besides Mike Conley, Colin Sexton, Jordan Clarkson, these are not good playmakers. These are guys that would be 6-mans on good teams. And that's not the motion for KPJ. I think that's, when the Rockets had James Harden here, Eric Gordon was arguably the 3rd, maybe 4th most important player on the team, and he didn't start. So it's not a demotion. That's a very important role, a guy that can lead your bench unit, and his role will be more on the ball or off the ball, depending on how roster construction goes when we're actually good. He's not overpaid to play that role, but expecting him to be a point guard against the best unit that the other team has to throw out there, and expecting him to do it full time is a bit much. And that doesn't make me any less excited about him as a player, because it's really valuable to have a bench scorer, and it's really valuable when your bench scorer plays so well, shoots so well off ball. He's a really, really good catch and shoot shooter. And let's imagine they draft Scoot Henderson, right? Scoot Henderson is eventually the starting point guard. The second unit largely, or probably, is Jalen Green being staggered with Scoot Henderson and KPJ, or the opposite, and you stagger Scoot Henderson the second unit with Jalen playing the majority of the minutes with the actual starting lineup. KPJ playing off of one of those guys as they develop, when they develop and when they're actual stars that we think they'll be, is a really interesting prospect, because now he's no longer a deficient point guard with deficient playmaking ability for his position. He's now an overqualified 6-man, because most 6-men don't have the playmaking ability that he has right now. Look at Eric Gordon, for example, when he was in Houston for when we were contending. He is now an overqualified playmaker. He's a really good shooter. He has good size to play defense, and he can now focus on that defensive side of the ball as well, with less responsibility offensively. And so I think it's a really exciting prospect, KPJ as a 6-man, because as I said, you're expecting a lot less out of him, and he can focus on other parts of his game while still having the experience of having been a starting point guard for what will be now 2 years. Who knows what's going to happen next year?
Mm-hmm.
And that's really interesting. That's a really valuable archetype. I think. I think he could be one of the best six men in the league. And considering how I value the six man role, as I just said earlier, I think the outlook of the fan base on him when he eventually slots into that role, depending on how the team building goes, will shift dramatically because he's someone that people want to succeed, right? He's someone who's
For
really
sure.
easy to
Great
root
story.
for. Great story. And when he's actually put in a position that in which I believe that he'll succeed, then he'll become a fan favorite, and it won't be a divisive topic. KPJ, I think it'll be like universally beloved KPJ because now he's playing a smaller role that he can excel at and actually go from, as I said, an underqualified starter to an overqualified bench player.
Yeah. Last topic I want to broach, and we've saved the best for last, at least in terms of the Orlando game, Jalen Green. Going into Orlando, the first 10 games when they were 1-9, the overarching story for the Rockets at a high level, we talked earlier about Jabari's struggles, but I think that's to be expected given his body type. He's 19 years old. He's a rookie. Whereas you look at the season as a whole, in year two, you're guys that can be expected to take somewhat of a jump. Alperen Sengun has been incredible. The top line numbers, 17 points and 10 boards in about 27, 28 minutes per game. But in terms of the efficiency, his player efficiency rating is now over 26. His true shooting percentage is 64.5. Just an unbelievable year from Sengun, especially offensively. Now, he still has trouble defensively against teams that are super long, like the Magic. We saw that at times in last night's game. And I think pairing Sengun with a very undersized small forward like Eric Gordon is also not ideal. You'd like to have some more length on the wings to sort of offset his athletic deficiencies, but at least on offense and really defensively, even if the matchups look bad at times, he's smart enough that he overcomes some of those issues. And, for the season as a whole, his offensive rating is 130, his defensive rating is 114. That's a huge split, regardless of what you think in terms of his personal limitations. It works in the construct of the team. Sengun has made the leap. What he is doing in year two is so encouraging. And yet, until last night, Jalen Green, it hasn't really been that way. He's averaging over 20 points per game, but it hasn't been very efficient. His true shooting percentage, 51.8, even after a strong game in Orlando, is still down from his rookie season. Now, there's some caveats to that. Shooting guards are inevitably going to be a bit more volatile, especially when they're young in their careers, than a big man like LP. I also agree that Jalen has not gotten a friendly whistle this year. His free throw rate is actually down from his rookie campaign. There are some extenuating circumstances, yet I do think it's fair to say through the first 10 games that, Jalen was a disappointment, that he was not the guy that we were hoping would build on his electric finish to last year. So within that sort of 30,000 foot view of the season and this idea that All P has taken the jump, but Jalen hasn't, the way that last night went, in which All P still gave you his normal 20 and 10, but Jalen finally got back. I know it's a weaker opponent. I know they're young. I know it's just one game. But to me, the way he did it efficiently, 12 of 18 shooting, he got to the free throw line when he needed to. His athleticism, his ability to make plays in space was just phenomenal. To me, it was just a really, really big confidence boost, not just for Jalen, but I think just the idea that he can be what we, have said throughout this offseason, that his potential is still there. And it's 10 games, but it's 10 games against a brutal schedule, a lot of veterans, a lot of things were going wrong with this team. And maybe, Jalen's inefficiency was just a byproduct of that. To me, it just felt like, not to make one game out of 82 into something more than it is, but just by the eye test, that looked like the Jalen that we saw to end last season. That gave me a lot of sort of assurances that, hey, this is going to be okay. Jalen is still that guy. And even in a court with so many young players, Paolo, we talked about earlier, Jalen Suggs, Franz Wagner, you can look at the Rockets with KPJ, Jalen, Sengun. And when it really mattered, Jalen was the best player on the floor, hands down. I know it's one game, but at least for me, that felt like more than one game in terms of its significance. And I think that's the kind of confidence builder that Jalen can build on as you move forward throughout the season. And of course, with this week, it's Toronto on Wednesday night. Where did you come in on Jalen's performance last night?
I think the biggest draw when you look at his game last night is he went 7 for 7 within the 3-point line, the 3-point line, and that's really important when it comes to him getting space to shoot his threes, and that's really important just because we saw him finally knock down a couple of mid-range shots. One of them I wasn't a big fan of. He was one of those off-balance, kind of DeMar DeRozan type, that I think are just inefficient. But one of them was a pick and roll, bigs playing back, balanced pull up for the mid-range shot. Those are the ones you need him to take. And when he knocks those down, it makes it easier for him to get to the rim. The Magic are not a great team, right? But it was encouraging. But there's something else I want to see out of him, which is we've seen him be really effective when the offense is set up for him, right? Or when the offense is coming to him. I want him to be better at forcing the issue. And a lot of that comes from having a bit of a more creative handle. Some of it comes from being able to draw fouls, and I think that's the key part.
Yes.
He gets contact, but he's not drawing the fouls. Whether he needs to flop more or he needs to to go to the James Harden Academy of Flopping or whatever. It's important.
James Harden Academy of Flopping. Jesus.
No, him being able to create his own offense will be important down the line, especially if we drafted a guy in Jabari Smith who is going to play off the ball. He's not going to be creating for himself, and I'm kind of slotting KPJ as a 6-man. It is important that you need at least 2 reliable shot creators on the floor. It is important that Jalen makes strides in that regard as well, because and part of that comes from Silas trusting him and making him the lead ball handler on the floor, even when it's not going well. That entire conversation about having to play Eric Gordon or Daishen Nix with Jalen Green because he wants to lead ball handler, to me, it was good for Jalen to understand that he needs to be able to play off ball during year 1, and I think it was a great decision. Year 2, I need to see him do more on the ball. I need him to be forced to do more on the ball. Because at the end of the day, he's not going to be like he can eat out of catch shoot jump shots, and he can eat out of driving when the advantages are already created for him and going downhill. But just blowing past your guy, and sometimes he can't even do that. Sometimes we see him kind of try to barrel into the defender, and he's not strong enough. And we saw it last night. It ended up leading to a foul. But if it wasn't the Magic, if it was some better team, he probably wouldn't have gotten fouled there. You need him to show a little bit more in that regard. If he's going to be this dynamic scorer that's going to average 30 points a game, it's important that the off-the-ball stuff is there, and I'm happy that it is. Let's start developing a little bit more stuff on the ball and see how good are you at creating for yourself. Whether that comes from more space, because he is an uber athletic player and he will be able to punish defenses more with space. That's a part of it, but I think another part of it has to be just being more creative with your handle, just being having maybe a little floater to your game, maybe being a more creative finisher around the rim. We see him when he is facing, elite shot blockers. He gets in trouble. He has trouble finishing at the rim. I mean, any player does, right? But it seems like he tries the same thing over and over again, and it's not working. And it eventually leads to him going 7 minutes without taking a shot. So I want to see them force him, and not to take away from the game last night. Great game last night. I think that is the next step with him.
Yeah.
Let's see him, get chances and create for himself. And part of it, once again, comes also from him improving as a pick and roll ball handler, which he's been awful at the season. Yep. But we need to see lead ball handler capabilities from him. It's important to have the off the ball. It seems like he has got it. Sometimes they just don't find them. Who has the ball doesn't find them on those opportunities, and that's why
Right.
his game fluctuates. His efficiency usually fluctuates between a game where he gets a lot of opportunities off the ball, or the games where they aren't finding him off the ball, and so he's forced to create for himself. And now the efficiency tanks because of it. And
Yep.
so I want to see them force the issue a little bit more with him on the ball.
Yeah, I get it. And the next week's going to be a big challenge for him and really the team as a whole, because you're going up against 4 teams that are 500 or better: Toronto, New Orleans, the Clippers, the Mavs, and 3 of those 4 are on the road. So we talked earlier about this win in Orlando giving you some hope that you'll see some more positive signs once the schedule eases up. You can make the case, but it has not eased up just yet. You're going to need to wait until a little later in the month. Really, the Indiana game on the 18th is when things start to ease up a bit for the Rockets, with a ton more home games and some against weaker opponents that maybe, not saying they're going to go on a 7-game winning streak like they did in late November, early December a year ago, but at least something more realistic. For the next week, it's still going to be pretty challenging, and Jalen's going to need to show strides if they want to win more than just the game they took in Orlando. If you want to build on that, even as good as Sengun has been, it's tough to see the formula without at least one of your primary playmaking guards, Jalen or KPJ, having, I don't want to say a dominant game, but at least a very good one and more efficient than they've been for a lot of this season. Anyway, with that, we'll bring this episode to a close. We've gone on a lot longer than we typically do, but that's because, number one, we had some Astros discussion to get out of the way early on. And secondly, we did not give y'all an episode last week because it was the World Series. So we thought we'd give you a little bit more this week. And when we get back into our normal routine a week from now, this will be hopefully a bit shorter and more in line with what you've come to expect from the Logger Line over these past few months. Paolo, thank you so much for the time. Where can folks follow you and your work?
Yeah, y'all can follow me on Twitter at PaulAlvesNBA. That's PAULOALVESNBA. Everything I do, from the podcast like this one to the new newsletter, will find itself linked on there.
Outstanding. Folks, he is Paolo Alves. I'm Ben Dubose. Thanks as always for listening. If you want more from me, you can, of course, follow me on Twitter at Ben Dubose. I promise it's going to be not private nearly as often now that the Astros World Series run is over. I think we can all de-stress a bit with that. So yeah, follow me on Twitter at Ben Dubose, the Rockets Wire on Twitter. That's the handle for Rockets Wire, where I'm the editor, USA Today's blog covering the Rockets. You can follow them at rocketswire.usatoday.com for all your daily coverage. Also, Sports Talk 790, which supports this show. Follow them on Twitter at Sports Talk 790, and you can listen to them and read their content at sports790.com. Finally, want to acknowledge our sponsors over at Karbach Brewing, who you can follow on Twitter at Karbach Brewing. This show is brought to you courtesy of Clutch City Lager, their beer in collaboration with the Houston Rockets. Again, Clutch City Lager of Karbach Brewing. Thanks as always to them and Sports Talk 790, the official flagship station of the Rockets, for their support. With those plugs out of the way, we will wrap up. For Paolo, I'm Ben. Thanks as always for listening, and please come back soon for another new episode of The Logger Line.